Hi there and welcome to this little video about Unit 2 Practical Sport, which hopefully will help you clarify a few things about learning AIM A and what you're going to be needing to write in your project for coursework assignment 1. Right, now we've already looked at some practical sports and how we actually play them, but integral to all that is the rules, regulations and scoring that happens, and that's what the first part of learning AIM A looks at. Now if we start with this section here, the rules, we want to know why we actually do have rules in sport. Now really simply, first thing is that we look at it for safety. We want to make sure that we minimise any sort of injury that happens so that everybody on the field feels safe. Anybody who's on the court feels that they are protected by the rules and the laws of the game, and that they therefore has a greater enjoyment. So I suppose if we think about it logically, we are there to make sure that everybody enjoys the game. Now, that said, as well as the safety aspect, we want to make sure that it is fair. So if we write that down there, fair. Now what do we mean by this? Well, if we have one set of rules in one country and then another set of rules in another, it's not going to be fair when they come and play against each other. And this is what was happening when the sport was in its evolution of organised sport. There was a really obvious and clear distinction between the rules between a different village, maybe 5 miles down the road, than there was in another village which was playing the same sport essentially but with different rules. For early examples of this, have a little look at some mob football. Just Google it and see what the origins of it were, and look at things like the Ashbourne Wall game. This is the sort of thing that might happen when you do A-level PE, but also is one of those things that is quite local to us, so it has a real resonance and gives a good example of why we do things. So, summaries on rules, safety and fair. Now, following on from this is this idea about regulations. Now, what are regulations? What are they? Well, we're going to talk about that in a couple of slides' time. But regulation, fairly similar. It makes sure that things are standardised and gives the idea that people have a fair crack at everything and that there are no variations around different games and different competitions and tournaments. That's really important, and we'll talk about that later. Finally, scoring. Well, pretty simply, it's just there to make sure we find out who the winners and losers are. And also, it helps us clarify what the scoring system is. So, for example, the way we score in badminton could be different for a football or a rugby game. The way we score in cricket is different to table tennis or softball or rounders. So we'll look at that and what you need to do in order to get a higher grade in your assignments. So rules, here we go. We need rules, as mentioned previously, to be safe, have fun, enjoyment, make sure that it's all nice and above board and people are in a good environment. But what do those rules actually look like and who actually governs them? Well, rules are generally the same, but there are variations from place to place. Now, these are decided by what we call NGBs, which stands for National Governing Bodies. And then you also get IRBs, which are International Governing Bodies. Now, if we think about some of these, what I'm going to ask you to do in a moment is to do some research, but you need to think about what national governing bodies and international governing bodies might be. So, for example, really simple, let's look at football. The FA create a set of rules that happen and govern the game of football in England, but they don't have total control of the game in international football. That is controlled by FIFA. So you might find that there are different rules and different variances depending on which competition it is. So a recent example of this might be the use of VAR or when in the World Cup and how it's not not being used in some of the current FA competitions like the Premier League. Now, what do these NGBs actually do? Well, if we move all the way over here, they simply make sure that they have a set of rules. You're going to need to identify what these rules are and then put them into specific situations to illustrate and show your understanding of the rules. Now, like I said, there may be some slight changes between national and international governing body, but in general, they're all very, very similar. Now, can you think of anything that might be slightly different? I've already given one example, but don't just think about the simple, most obvious sports. It may be that there's something that you may need to research and look into, and then include that in any written work. Now, the rules can be anything from how long a game is, to the size of balls used, or even something like how they restart a game. Now, these are all come into play, and you need to know and be able to illustrate around 10, 11, 12 rules that should be in high levels of detail. Make sure that you go and look on the internet and find out who the governing bodies are for each sport, and then identify a couple of them, and then come up with some really detailed analysis from those websites. Now, regulations. Now, this is quite a sticky subject in terms that lots of people get confused between rules and regulations and what the difference is. Rules are with it in play whilst the game is actually being played, whereas regulations tend to be things that are standardised across every facet of the game. So, for example, these are the things that would happen. So let's say we were going to go and play a football game in America or Brazil or Italy, or even a bit closer to home over in somewhere like Wales or Scotland. There'll be a set of regulations that are the same. Now, these are things like the size of goals. It could be the type of surface used. And something like a game of rugby at the moment has lots of variations where people are using synthetic pitches or grass pitches. Do they meet the regulations set by the national governing bodies or the international governing bodies? Now, something to consider is how many regulations can you find? From sport to sport, you're going to find that there are some that have got loads and loads of regulations, whereas others have got some far more simplistic and easier to follow regulations that you can find out really quickly and easily. Again, a quick Google search is going to help you identify that. Remember to reference all the work that you've done and anything that you've found in those searches. But I suppose a big thing to ask is why? Why have all these regulations? Well, again, it comes down to that idea that making sure that standards of safety, quality of the game, and any other factors, so like the use of equipment, are all regulated so that there is no variances when you're going to play each of these things. Every single time you do these regulations and checks, there is a series of referrals that happen a year on year. So, for example, the governing bodies will sit down and they'll talk about are there any rules or regulations that need to be changed unchallenged. This is something that happens a lot in sports like contact sports like rugby, American football, where there is an element of danger towards a player, and player welfare is really, really considered to be of massive importance to the game itself and the integrity of the game. And finally, we've got scoring. Now, scoring again is really simple. It determines who the winners and losers are. You need to research the methodology of each and every single sport. think of about 3 or 4 sports and make a comparison. Now let's remember, if we're looking at a distinction piece of work, okay, we're going to be looking at analysing and comparing a couple of sports. How does badminton differ to basketball? How does football differ to cricket? And so on and so on. We then need to make an evaluation. They are the 3 things that we're looking for in that high level piece of work to get that distinction that will be the ultimate grade. Now, for example, how do we score in basketball? Well, if you get a layup, you get 2 points. If we get a set shot or a jump shot, it's just 2 points. But then if we perform any of the other shots outside the 3-point arc, okay, outside arc, we instantly get 3 points. And then obviously we've got our free throws as well that can add just a single point. However, if we make a comparison, playing a game of badminton, you go up in sequential order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and determined by who wins the point will determine what the score is. You're going to have to evidence this scoring method and make sure that you know a bit more about what it is each sport is trying to achieve and what their methodology is. So in summary, what we're looking at is rules need to be fair and safe. The regulations provide control and standardisation. And scoring is going to simply decipher who the winners are. Make sure that you think about all these 3 principles when you're going in and doing your assignment, but you need to add as much detail as you can. It's really important that you do your research, look at those NGBs and the decisions that they make, and then hopefully that will give an idea of you explaining it in your presentation. Okay, thanks for listening. Hopefully it made sense.